"Fix this," the billionaire said, "and I'll hire you." He did not look at Maren when he said it. He said it to the room, to the 12 exhausted faces ringed around the long walnut table, to the wall of screens behind him bleeding red, to the city of glass towers sweating in the late July heat beyond the windows. He said it the way a man throws a glass against a wall, not to break the wall, but to hear the noise. And the room laughed, because the room was supposed to laugh, and because the woman holding the tray of barely touched lamb and cold asparagus was only the help. Maren Holt stood very still, with the tray balanced against her hip. The smell of the kitchen still clung to her. Garlic, scorched butter, the faint copper tang of the ice she'd been hauling all night, and under it, sharper, the ozone smell of a dozen overheating laptops in a sealed private dining room, with the air conditioning losing the fight. The tray's edge bit a cold line into her hip bone. On the largest screen, a logistics dashboard climbed and climbed, a column of numbers doubling against itself like a tide that had forgotten how to go out. She knew that shape. She knew it the way you know a face in a crowd that you have spent years trying not to see again. 300 dishes a night, the billionaire went on, spreading his hands. His name was Elvar Sten, and the men beside him had flown in from 2 continents to watch his company stop breathing. "We have the finest minds money can rent in this building, and Meridian pulls their at 9 tomorrow morning. $100 million. Gentlemen gone before the coffee's poured, so by all means." He turned finally and found her. His eyes were the flat gray of a lake under cloud. "You, with the tray, you've been staring at my numbers for an hour. Fix this, and I'll hire you on the spot." The laughter came again, looser this time, relieved to have a target. Maren set the tray down on the service trolley. The silver rang once against the steel, a small clean note in the overheated room. Her hands were steady. That surprised her, distantly, the way you notice your own reflection in a dark window and don't recognize it for a half-second. Your reconciliation engine is double-counting every shipment that crosses midnight, she said. Not all of them, just the ones routed through your overnight hub. You're not losing the contract because the platform is broken. You're losing it because someone told the platform to lie to you, and it got tired of choosing which lie. The room went quiet. The dashboard climbed. Somewhere a laptop fan whined up an octave, then gave out. And Elvar Sten, who had not been genuinely surprised by anything in 4 years, leaned forward an inch. She should have stopped there. Every instinct she had built since the worst week of her life told her to pick the tray back, up, to make herself small and quiet and useful, to be the kind of woman nobody remembers in a deposition. "Okay," she told herself. "Okay, walk away." Instead, she heard herself say, "Do you want the rest of it, or was the offer a joke?" A man at Elvar's right hand made a soft sound, halfway between a cough and a warning. He was handsome in the expensive way. Silver at the temples, a charcoal suit that fit like water, and the smell of his cologne. Cedar, something costly, cut across the kitchen smell on her apron. Maren had been watching him all night without knowing why. Now she knew. The recognition went through her like a swallow of ice. "That won't be necessary," the man said smoothly. "Mr. Sten, the team has this well in hand." "We don't need a glance at her apron, the wine stain near the hem, a caterer's intuition." "Dorian," Elvar said without turning, "be quiet." He stood. He was tall, and the long day had carved hollows under his eyes. And somewhere in the building, a child's drawing was taped to a window 40 floors up, though Maren did not know that yet. He crossed to the trolley, and the carpet swallowed his steps, and he looked down at the climbing screen, and then at her, and for one moment the mockery thinned, and underneath it was something raw and tired and desperate that he would have paid a great deal to keep hidden. "Finish it," he said, quietly now, just to her. So she did. The clock on the wall said 11:40. In 9 hours and 20 minutes, the second largest freight network on the continent would decide whether Elvar Sten's company still existed. And Maren Holt, who had not touched a line of working architecture in 3 years and 11 months, pulled the pencil from behind her ear and reached for the nearest laptop. The plastic was hot under her fingers, warm as a forehead with fever. She did not see Dorian Vance go still as winter behind her. She did not see him register her face, slowly, the way a man recognizes the one witness he believed he had buried. But she would. The kitchen of the Ardent Room emptied at midnight. Theo found her there an hour later, sitting on an overturned milk crate in the cold store doorway where the air smelled of cut lemons and bleach and the steel still ticked as it cooled. 3 borrowed laptops open on her knees and a smear of grease pencil down her forearm. Cold breathed out of the open store against her shins. Theo had run the front of that restaurant for 26 years and had buried 2 wives' worth of opinions about the people he served. He was 70 if he was a day, narrow as a corkscrew, and he wore his tuxedo like a man who had decided long ago that dignity was cheaper than happiness and lasted longer. "They've gone up to the war room," he said. "All of them." The tall, sad ones sent down for coffee at 1 in the morning, like coffee's ever fixed her. Single thing it was asked to. He set a cup beside her anyway. Black, 2 sugars, the way she took it. The steam curled up warm into the cold doorway. "You're going to tell me what you're doing. Fixing his $100 million problem on a milk crate." Maren didn't look up. "Apparently I work here now." He said so. He said a great many things. Rich men do. Theo lowered himself onto the second crate with the slow ceremony of old knees. "I've watched that one for 2 years of private dinners. Never finishes a plate. Talks to the room and never to a person. Tips like a man trying to apologize for something he won't name." He studied her over the rim of his own cup. "And in 2 years I have never once seen him lean toward anybody the way he leaned toward you tonight. So I'll ask again, and this time I'm asking the real question. Maren, what are you doing?" She finally looked at him. Under the fluorescent light, her face was all sharp planes and shadows. A face that had once been on a quarterly earnings call, and then on a very different kind of news. "I'm doing the thing I swore I'd never do again," she said. "Which is being the smartest person in a room full of men who will need someone to blame at 9 a.m. Theo was quiet a moment. Outside, a city bus sighed at the corner, and the summer night pressed warm against the loading dock door, and somewhere a delivery truck reversed with its small, patient warning, beep. The whole back of house smelled of mop water and lemons, and the day's last bread going stale in the bins. "Then, for God's sake," he said, "this time get it in writing." She laughed, a short, startled sound, the first one in years that hadn't cost her anything, and went back to the screen. What she had told the room was true, but it was the polite version, the version you give to people who pay you. The whole truth was uglier and more elegant at once. Holden Systems ran the supply spine for a dozen freight giants. Routing, inventory, reconciliation, the dull, invisible plumbing that decides whether the cereal reaches the shelf. 3 weeks ago, someone had pushed a manual override into the reconciliation layer. A suppression rule, the kind you use to hide a number you don't want a client to see. On its own, it was harmless, cowardly, but harmless. But the override had a flaw, and the flaw woke up every night at the international date boundary. When shipments crossing from one calendar day to the next got counted, suppressed, and then, because the suppression itself created a gap, counted again. By dawn, the system believed in tens of thousands of crates that did not exist. By the showcase at 9 a.m., it would believe in $100 million of them. Maren knew the signature of that override, the way a forger knows another forger's hand. She had seen it before. She had begged a man not to use it once, in a glass conference room on the other side of the country, and he had used it anyway. And when it broke, he had stood in front of a different board and said her name, as if it were the name of the problem. The man upstairs in the war room drinking 1 a.m. Coffee was that man, her pencil stilled on the page. "Walk away," the old voice said again. "You know how this ends. You've read the last chapter of this exact book, and it ends with your name in a headline and your hands shaking for a year. But 3 floors up, a company full of people who did the routing and the loading and the night shifts was going to wake to no jobs because Dorian, Vance, had been afraid of a bad number. And 1 floor below the war room, taped to a window where a tired man could see it, was a drawing in orange crayon of 3 stick figures. One of them small, that Maren had not seen and could not have known to weigh. She finished the coffee. The bitterness sat warm at the back of her throat. She picked up the pencil. "Okay," she said to no one, "one more time." By the time the eastern sky over the harbor turned the bruised silver of a summer dawn, she had it. Not the whole repair, that would take a team and a week, but the tourniquet, a normalization patch that would force every midnight crossing shipment to be counted exactly once, in 1 time zone, against 1 source of truth, long enough to get the platform clean through the 9 a.m. demonstration. She had written it out longhand on the backs of 4 drink menus, because no one had given her access to anything, and the logic of it was so clean it almost hurt. Like a held breath finally let go, she climbed the back stairs, because she did not have a badge for the elevator. Her shoes whispered on the concrete. The stairwell smelled of cold paint and her own long night. She came out into a glass corridor on the 41st floor where the rising sun lay in, long gold bars across the carpet, and the whole sleepless city was laid out below in haze and heat shimmer. And there, alone in a dark office at the corridor's end, was Elvar Sten. He didn't know she could see him. The glass wall was one way to his tired eyes, just his own reflection over the skyline. He had taken off his jacket and his tie hung loose, and he stood at the window with a phone in his hand, and as Maren watched, he looked at the screen and his thumb hovered, and then he declined the call and set the phone face down on the sill. On the glass beside him, taped at a child's careless angle, was a crayon drawing. 3 figures. A tall one, a medium one with its arms scribbled out, and a small one holding the tall one's enormous orange hand. He reached out and straightened the drawing so it hung level. It was the gentlest thing Maren had ever watched a powerful man do, and he did it as though no one in the world would ever see, which was the only reason it was true. She stood in the gold corridor with 4 drink menus full of salvation in her hand, and understood, with the swift, unwelcome clarity that had ruined her life once already, that she was in a great deal of trouble. Then she knocked on the glass. The sound was small and flat in the big bright corridor. He turned. For a moment, before the office and the contract and the $100 million came back into his face, he simply looked at her like a man surfacing from deep water. "It's done," she said. "Or it can be, in about 90 minutes, if you give me a person who can actually touch the system and the authority to make them listen to me." She held up the menus. "It's on the back of your wine list. You're welcome." He crossed the office and took them from her. The paper was soft from her grip and smelled faintly of the kitchen. He read. She watched his eyes move, and she watched the exact instant he understood. Not the patch, he wasn't an engineer, but the shape of what she'd seen, the fact of it, the impossible fact that a woman with a wine stain on her apron had walked into his catastrophe and found the door. His jaw worked. He turned the menus over, looking for more, the way a starving man checks a plate. "Who are you?" he said. It was the first sincere question he had asked anyone in a very long time, and they both felt it land. "I'm the caterer's intuition," she said. "Get me a keyboard, Mr. Sten." Her name, when the systems finally let her log in under a guest credential at 7:20, was already a problem. She had not given it. But Dorian Vance had spent the small hours doing the one thing he was genuinely good at, which was managing what other people were allowed to know. And so when Maren Holt sat down at last at a real workstation in the glass war room, the morning sun pouring in, the harbour below busy with ferries, the air thick with cold coffee, and the plasticky heat of 40 machines, and the sweat of men who had not slept, Dorian was waiting, and he was smiling, and the smile reached the rest of the room before she'd typed a character. "Before we let her near the production environment," he said pleasantly, "I think Mr. Sten and the board should know who they're trusting with their crown jewels at the 11th hour." He set a tablet on the table and slid it the length of the polished wood toward Elvar with one manicured finger. The tablet hissed across the wax. Maren Holt, formerly lead systems architect at Calder Dynamics. You'll remember Calder. Everyone does. The platform collapse that cost 40,000 retailers their inventory data over a holiday weekend 4 years ago. He let it sit. She was the architect of record. She was let go in what the trade press at the time called the most spectacular engineering failure of the decade. And now she's pouring your wine. A murmur went around the table like a draft. Maren did not move. The patch was loaded on the screen in front of her. One keystroke from deployment, and she sat with her hands flat on the cool desk and felt the old shame come up her throat like floodwater, familiar and total, the shame that said, "You are the problem, your mind is the problem, make yourself small." She looked at Dorian Vance. She made herself look at him until he had to work, just slightly, to hold the smile. "That's true," she said. "All of it, the way you've arranged it." She turned to Elvar. Calder collapsed because someone pushed a reconciliation suppression rule into the production layer to hide a quarter of bad numbers from a client against the written objection of the architect of record. The architect of record sent 4 emails saying the rule would cascade at the date boundary. The architect of record was overruled, and when it cascaded exactly the way she said it would, the company needed one name to give the press, and they gave them hers, because she was 31 and replaceable, and the man who'd pushed the rule was a partner. She kept her voice level. It was the hardest thing she had done in years. "Your platform is failing this morning because of the same rule, the same signature, the same hand." The room looked, slowly, the way rooms do, from her to the elegant man at Elvar's right. "This is a fascinating fiction," Dorian said, but a thread had come loose in his voice. "Then it'll be easy to disprove," Maren said. "The override carries the author's credential hash in the deployment log. I haven't touched your logs, I haven't had access, but you have." She nodded at the screen. "Open it, in front of everyone, show us whose hand." For one long moment nobody breathed, and the air conditioner finally caught up and exhaled cold across the back of Maren's neck, and the ferries crossed the bright water below as if hundreds of millions of dollars did not hang in a glass box in the sky. "Open it," Elvar said. "Elvar, it's 7:30. Elvar had not raised his voice. He turned his father's old signet ring once around his finger, a slow habit, and his grey eyes had stopped being tired. "I have 90 minutes and a witness and a patch I do not understand, written on the back of my own wine list. Either she's right, in which case I want to know, or she's wrong, in which case opening one log will end it. Open it, Dorian. That's not a request I'm planning to make twice." The smile was entirely gone now, and Maren Holt, sitting very small at a borrowed keyboard, watched the most powerful man in the room choose, in front of his board, to believe the waitress, and felt something she had spent 4 years convincing herself she would never feel again, which was the specific terrible warmth of being defended. "Don't," she told herself. "Don't you dare. You know how that ends too." She deployed the patch instead. They did not open the log that morning in the end, because at 7:34, the Meridian representatives arrived 11 minutes early to be difficult, and from 7:34 to 9:06, Maren ran the cleanest, quietest firefight of her life, from a chair no one had given her. She talked 3 terrified Halden engineers through her own logic line by line, her voice the only steady thing in a room gone sour with cold coffee and fear sweet, while the dashboard, slowly, then all at once, stopped climbing, crested, and began, beautifully, to fall. By 9:06 the numbers were true, the phantom crates were gone. The Meridian contract director, a brisk woman in linen who had clearly come to perform a funeral, frowned at the live feed for a long time, asked 2 sharp questions that Maren answered before Dorian could open his mouth, and then signed the renewal in summer morning light with a pen Elvar had to lend her. The nib scratched once across the page, and $100 million stayed exactly where it was. The room, when the Meridian people had gone, did the thing rooms do when catastrophe passes. It laughed too loud and clapped too long, and several people who had laughed at her at midnight now found reasons to be standing near her. Maren stood up from the chair, and her legs were not entirely sure about it, and Theo, who had no business on the 41st floor and had come up anyway, carrying, of all things, a tray of orange juice and pastries, because someone in this glass tower ought to feed the woman who'd saved it, pressed a warm croissant into her hand. The butter smell of it cut through the machine heat of the room. "Eat," he muttered. "You've gone the color of the tablecloth, and I notice nobody's said the word salary yet, which tells you everything about the altitude." "Theo, I'm only saying, at my restaurant we at least pretend the help is human, before we work them through the night." He surveyed the celebrating executives with the flat eye of a man pricing a wedding. "Look at them. 3 hours ago she was furniture. Now they'd carry her down the stairs on their shoulders if she'd let them. And by Friday half of them will have decided it was their idea." He bit a pastry himself, unbothered, scattering flakes down his lapel. Money does to a memory what the sun does to milk. It was the funniest true thing anyone had said to her in years, and she nearly choked on the croissant. Then Elvar was there. Up close in daylight, with the contract saved, he looked younger and more uncertain than the man who had thrown a glass against a wall at midnight. "Mrs. Holt," he said, and stopped, and seemed to discover that he did not have a script for this. "I said something at this table 11 hours ago. I meant it as a cruelty. I want to mean it now as an offer." A pause. "Come and work for me, properly. Name the role. Name the number." Around them the room had gone quiet again to listen. Maren looked at him, and at the croissant, and at Theo's expression, which said, "Get it in writing," as loudly as a face could say anything, and at Dorian Vance by the window, with his arms folded and his ruin postponed, watching her with eyes that promised this was not over. "No," she said. The word dropped into the room like a coin into a well. "I don't want a role you've invented to feel better about midnight," she went on, before he could speak. "And I don't want to be the woman who fixed it once and gangstinked at the holiday party. I've been the smartest person in a room that needed a scapegoat, Mr. Sten. I know what it costs, and I know who pays it." She set the croissant down on Theo's tray. "If you want me, you'll want all of it. You'll reopen that log. You'll clear what's mine to clear. And you'll give me something real, or you'll give me nothing, and I'll go back downstairs and pour your wine, and we'll both pretend tonight never happened." She had no idea where the words came from. They came from the milk crate in the cold store, maybe. From Theo's get it in writing. From a drawing on a window, straightened by a careful hand. From 4 years of swallowing. Elvar Sten looked at her for a long moment. "All right," he said. It was not the answer she'd braced for. It knocked the wind clean out of her. "All right," he said again, quieter, to all of it. And then, because he was still a man who hid behind logistics when feeling threatened to show, He turned to the room and said, "Everyone out. Dorian, you stay," in a voice that closed the subject, and the celebration filed away into the elevators, and the summer sun climbed the glass, and somewhere 40 floors down a city went on shelving its cereal, unaware of how close it had come. The reopening of the log took 4 minutes and ended a 14-year friendship. Maren was not in the room for it. Elvar sent her to wait in the small office at the end of the gold corridor, the one with the drawing on the window, and she sat in his chair because there was no other. The leather was cool and smelled faintly of him, cedar and paper, and she looked at 3 kronfigures and tried not to think about the fact that she was sitting in a billionaire's chair at 10 in the morning, having upended her own carefully ruined life on a dare. When he came in, his face had the specific blankness of a man holding something heavy and refusing to set it down where anyone could see. "It was him," he said, "I know. He was my first hire. Before there was a company, there was a garage and a whiteboard and Dorian, and I trusted him with." Elvar stopped. He looked at the drawing. He pushed the suppression rule to hide a metric miss from the board last quarter, so the bonus pool wouldn't take a hit. His bonus pool. Mine. He knew it might cascade, and he gambled it wouldn't before someone caught it. A long breath. And 4 years ago, at Calder, he did the same thing, and a 31-year-old architect caught it. And he buried her so he could keep his place beside me clean, with a great story about a collapse that wasn't his fault. He turned the ring on his finger, around and around. "I built half of what I have on the back of the woman he ruined," he said. "And I kept the man who ruined her, gave him a corner office, and let him pour himself a future out of your career." Maren said nothing. There was nothing in the etiquette books for this. "I've put him on administrative leave pending the board review," Elvar said. "Legal will want months. The press will be ugly when it breaks, both ways, his and yours." He finally looked at her. "I can't undo 4 years in a morning, Miss Holt, but I can put my name on the correction. And my name is worth a headline now in a way that yours wasn't allowed to be at 31. Calder will be made to issue a statement. The trade press will print it because I'll make it interesting for them too. It won't give you back the 4 years." He paused. "But it'll give you back your name." The summer light moved across the carpet. Down on the harbor, a ferry sounded its horn, low and patient, and another answered, and a gull rode the hot updraft past the glass and was gone. "Why?" Maren said. Her voice was not quite steady. "You don't owe me this. You could thank me, pay me, let me sign an agreement that says I was a consultant, and I'd take it. I'd be grateful. Most people in your position would do exactly that, and call it generous." Elvar Sten was quiet for a moment, and when he answered, he did not look at her. He looked at the drawing of 3 stick figures, one small. "Because I have a daughter," he said, "who is going to grow up to be the smartest person in a great many rooms. And I would like, when she is 31 and right and outnumbered, for there to be one more man in the world who decided to open the log." It was, Maren would think much later, the moment it became dangerous in earnest. Not the defending. The reason, "Okay," she said softly, because it was all she had. "Okay." The thing she had not bargained for was Dorian Vance still having a key card for 3 more days. He came on the 2nd afternoon to clear his office, and he chose the hour he knew she'd be alone on the floor. Late, the cleaners not yet up, the light gone long and copper across the carpet. Maren felt him before she heard him, the cedar cologne arriving ahead of the man, and she looked up from her screen to find him leaning in her doorway with a banker's box under one arm, and the old smile back in place, polished and patient. "They gave you my view," he said. "Well, half of it. The good half faces the water." He set the box down on the spare chair without being asked. The cardboard scraped. "I wanted to say congratulations. Genuinely. It's an extraordinary thing you did. The wine list patch. I've been in this business 20 years, and I couldn't have read that override cold off a dashboard. You're the real thing. You always were. That was rather the problem. You should go, Marin said. You're not supposed to be on this floor. I'm clearing my office. It's allowed. He picked up a framed photograph from the box, looked at it, set it back. You know what I've never understood about you? You had it all at Calder. You could have signed the agreement they offered. Quiet money, a non-disclosure, a clean reference to wherever you wanted next. I drew that agreement up myself, you know. It was generous, and you wouldn't sign it. You sent your 4 little emails, and then you went so quiet at the end that everyone assumed the quiet was guilt. He tilted his head. I always wondered if you knew you were doing my work for me. The floodwater started up her throat. She made herself hold his eyes. I know exactly what I did, she said. I made myself small so you'd have room. I've thought about it every day for 4 years. I'm not doing it anymore. That's the part you came up here to find out, isn't it? Whether I'd gone quiet again. Something flickered behind the polished face. Not shame. He didn't carry the equipment for it. But calculation, the abacus behind the eyes clicking over to a new sum. You think the log finishes me? His voice stayed pleasant. That was the worst of it. A credential hash. Elvar's righteousness, his sister's board. He lifted the box, settled it against his hip. But I've spent 14 years learning where the soft places are in that man. And there's exactly one. And it's not the company, and it's not you. You've made yourself very visible, Marin. Visible people photograph well. He paused in the doorway, and the cedar smell hung. Take care on the way down. The lobby floor gets slick when it rains. He left. The box corner clipped the doorframe on the way out. A small flat knock. And then the corridor swallowed his steps, and Marin sat in the copper light with her heart going hard and the certainty settling in her stomach like a swallowed stone that he had just told her exactly what he was going to do and that she had not understood enough of it in time to stop it. Her name was Liv, and she was 6, and she arrived in Marin's life 8 days later through a door no one had told Marin to expect. The arrangement on paper was clean. Marin had a title now. Director of Systems Integrity. A thing Elvar had invented in an afternoon, and a thing she discovered she was extravagantly suited for, and an office 2 doors down from his, and a salary that made Theo whistle when she told him, and a contract she had read 4 times before signing, because some lessons do not unlearn. Her job was to find every place where Halden's plumbing had been taught to lie and unteach it. She was very good at it. For the first 2 weeks she came in at 7 and left at 9 and spoke to Elvar only about source of truth hierarchies and credential hashes, which suited them both, because logistics was the country where they both knew the language. It was also, she discovered, worse than anyone upstairs had let themselves believe. The midnight override had not been Dorian's only fingerprint. He had been gently teaching the system to flatter its quarterly numbers for the better part of 2 years. A suppression here, a rounding rule there, each one small, each one cowardly, each one harmless until the day it wasn't. She found a routine that quietly aged out customer complaints before they could cluster into a pattern. She found a reconciliation tweak that borrowed from next month to make this month whole. None of it was theft, exactly. All of it was the same instinct. Hide the bad number, gamble that the catch comes later, leave it for whoever's holding the keyboard when the tide goes out. She catalogued every one of them in a clean numbered list, and the more she found, the more she understood the man who had leaned in her doorway smelling of cedar. Not a villain in the operatic sense, just a person who had decided, very young, that the truth was a cost to be managed rather than a debt to be paid, and had been right often enough to never learn otherwise. Then, on a Thursday, the door to her office opened without a knock, and a small person walked in, considered her, and announced, "You're the one who fixed the numbers," Dad said. He said you saw it when nobody else could, and that's because you actually look. Most people don't actually look. She set a juice box on Maren's desk as though paying a toll. It sweated a small cold ring onto the wood. I'm Liv. I'm 6 3/4. Why do you have a pencil behind your ear if you have a whole computer? Maren looked at the small, grave face and felt something turn over in her chest. Because computers crash, she said, and pencils don't. Liv considered this with the seriousness of a Supreme Court. That's smart, she allowed. Okay, you can be my friend. Dad's in a meeting where everybody's pretending not to be mad, so I'm hiding. There's a man with grey hair who used to give me candy, and now he's not allowed in the building. And nobody will tell me why. Some grown-up things are boring, Maren said carefully, and some are sad, and that one's both, so we don't have to talk about it. Do you want to see something better than candy? What's better than candy? Maren turned her monitor. The screen's glow lit the child's face. I'll show you how a computer counts the same crate twice and gets 100 million imaginary crates. It's the dumbest smart mistake in the world, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Liv climbed onto the spare chair without being asked, smelling of chlorine and grape juice, and that was the beginning of a thing that no contract had a clause for. Elvar found them an hour later, the two of them shoulder to shoulder. Liv driving the mouse with her tongue between her teeth, Maren narrating in the patient, even voice she'd used on the terrified engineers. And he stood in the doorway and did not announce himself, and the look on his face was the look he'd worn at the window with the phone, a man surfacing. She's not bothering you, he said. It was almost a question. With Liv, it was always almost a question. Maren would come to understand that he had been a single father for 2 years and was still, every single day, checking the depth of the water before he let himself trust the floor. She caught an off-by-one error I'd missed, Maren said. She's hired. I'm hired, Liv confirmed. She pays in juice boxes. Dad, did you know the computer counts a crate twice if it crosses midnight? It's the dumbest smart mistake in the world. I'm beginning to learn, Elvar said, and his eyes found Maren's over the child's bent head, and for a second neither of them said anything, and the summer evening came in gold through the glass, and far below the city went home in a long red river of taillights. She started staying for dinner after that, not by arrangement, by the slow accretion of a person being needed. Elvar worked late. The nanny, Priya, had a night class on Tuesdays. Liv liked the way Maren explained things, and so a pattern formed where Maren would find herself at 8 in the evening at the long table in the penthouse, a glass eyrie at the top of the tower with too much marble and too few soft things in it, eating takeout off good china with a 6-year-old, and the man who signed her checks, and pretending this was a normal thing that happened to her. The penthouse always smelled faintly of nothing, she noticed. Filtered air, cut flowers a service placed before they could drop a petal, the cold mineral smell of all that stone. It was a house that had been decorated and never quite lived in, and the only warm corner of it was wherever Liv currently was. It was on one of those evenings that she understood how alone he was. Not lonely in the way of a man with an empty calendar. Elvar's calendar was a battlefield. Lonely in the way of a man who had organized his entire life so that no one could ever again be in a position to fail him, and had succeeded so completely that there was no one left who could reach him at all. He ate standing up. He took calls during stories. He gave Liv everything, the school, the lessons, the careful nanny, the drawings taped where he could see them, and could not, Maren slowly saw, sit still in a room with his own daughter without a screen between them. Because stillness was where the things he didn't look at lived. Her mother's in Geneva, he said. One night, when Liv had gone to bed, and the takeout cartons sat cooling between them, and the city was a field of low stars below the glass, he said it the way you confess a structural flaw. We were a merger, really, in hindsight. Two ambitious people who mistook compatibility for the other thing. She wanted a life that didn't have me in it, which was fair, because I'd built it a life that didn't have room for anyone in it. She sends gifts. She's not a villain. She's just elsewhere. Permanently elsewhere. He turned his water glass a quarter turn. The ice in it had long gone to water. Liv asked me last month if she'd done something. 6 years old, and her first theory was that it was her fault. His jaw tightened. I know that math. I grew up doing that math. I'd hoped. He stopped. It doesn't matter what I'd hoped. Maren should have said something kind and professional and left. My father used to say I was too much, she said instead, surprising herself. Too many questions, too many corrections, too much wanting to know how things worked. He'd say it the way you'd describe a flaw in a horse. She wrapped both hands around her own glass. The cold of it grounded her, and I spent my whole career learning to be exactly enough. To flag the problem once, quietly in writing, and then go small. And the one time it mattered, the going small was what they used. They said she barely raised it, as if I'd been ashamed of being right. She looked at her hands. So, when Liv tells you the computer makes a dumb smart mistake, you let her be too much. You let her be the most too much person in every room she's ever in. It's the only thing I'd undo if I could go back. Not the collapse, the being small. The silence after that was a different kind of silence. I don't think you're too much, Elvar said. You've known me 3 weeks, and I cost you a friendship, and saved you $100 million in the same morning. You don't have data. I have, he said, the entire wine list. And Maren laughed, really laughed, the croissant laugh, the milk crate laugh, and across the table Elvar Stens did something she had not seen him do, something Priya would later swear she had not witnessed in 2 years of employment. He smiled, fully, with his whole tired face, like a window thrown open in a shut-up house. It was the first joke he had made since she'd met him. Neither of them mentioned it, but she drove home through the warm, street-lit dark, with it lodged in her chest like a swallowed ember, the window of the car down, and the summer night smelling of hot asphalt and someone's late barbecue. And she thought, with the part of her that had read the last chapter of this exact book, oh, no, the trouble with a saved company is that it is suddenly worth fighting over. The Holden board met on the first Tuesday of August, and Maren was summoned to it, and she understood the moment she walked into the room. Long table, harbour glittering, the heat pressing white against the glass, the cold air smelling of furniture polish and somebody's mint. That she had stopped being a miracle and become a problem to be managed. The miracle was over. The 100 million was safe, and now there was the matter of the woman with the headline in her past who had a billionaire's ear and a 6-year-old's loyalty, and a corner office she had been handed in an afternoon. The matter was managed by Sigrun Sten. Elvar's older sister chaired the board. She was 60, silver-haired, dressed in the kind of summer linen that costs more than it looks, and is meant to, and she had built the financial spine of Halden, while her brother dreamed at whiteboards, and she loved exactly 2 things in the world without reservation: the company and the small girl who drew on its windows. She regarded Maren the way a customs officer regards a suitcase that has pinged. Frankly, Sigrun said, and Maren would learn that Sigrun began most verdicts this way, the word a small door opening onto a guillotine. I find the entire arrangement irregular. We have hired into a position of access to our most sensitive systems. A woman publicly associated with the worst systems collapse of the decade on the strength of a single night's performance and my brother's enthusiasm. She folded her hands on the cool table. The press, when it learns of it, will not pass the nuances. They will say, Halden hired the Calder architect, and our share price does not care whose hand was on the override, Miss Holt. It cares about the headline. You are, at present, a liability wearing a solution's clothes. It was, Maren thought, an extremely well-constructed sentence. She had spent 4 years being managed by people less competent than this. "You're right," she said. Sigrun blinked. It was clearly not the move she'd prepared for. "The headline is a liability," Maren went on. "So let's control the headline. Don't wait for it to break and react. Break it yourselves." She leaned forward, palms flat on the polished wood. Holden Systems uncovers and corrects an internal sabotage, clears the wrongly blamed engineer behind the Calder collapse, and hires her to rebuild its integrity layer. That's not a scandal, Miss Sten. That's a redemption arc, and the markets pay a premium for those. You don't have a liability. You have the best public relations story your company will ever get, and you're treating it like a stain because it walked in wearing an apron. She let that sit precisely as long as Dorian had let his accusation sit weeks ago in this same room. "I learned that from a man on your payroll. He was very good at it. He's on administrative leave now." Somebody at the far end of the table coughed to cover a laugh. Sigrunsten looked at Maren for a long, level moment. Something flickered behind the customs officer eyes that was not warmth, exactly, but was a recalibration. "You're not what I was told you were," she said. "People rarely are," Maren said. "It's the whole problem with headlines. She won the room that day. She did not win Sigrun. She would come to understand that those were very different things, and that the second one would cost her far more. The thing about a glimpse of happiness is that you only recognize it as a glimpse afterward." It came on a Saturday in the middle of August, the kind of summer morning when the whole city seems to have exhaled. And it came disguised as nothing at all. Liv had a swimming lesson and then a birthday party. And there was a gap of 3 hours in the middle, and somehow the 3 of them ended up at the farmer's market under the highway overpass. The stalls smelled of warm peaches and basil and cut grass, and the diesel of the trucks idling at the curb. A man played something gentle on a battered guitar, the case open at his feet with a scatter of coins in it. The heat was the good kind, the kind that slows a day down rather than ruining it, and the concrete under the overpass threw back the warmth, so the whole market felt like standing inside a held breath. Liv walked between them, holding a hand, each, which she did without comment, as though it had always been the arrangement, and made them stop at every stall. "You don't know what a rambutan is," she informed Maren, scandalized, holding up the spiky red fruit so close that Maren went cross-eyed. "I know exactly what it is. I'm choosing not to trust it. It looks like it bites back. Dad, she's scared of a fruit. She fixed a $100 million system on a milk crate," Elvar said gravely, "and she's scared of a fruit. People contain multitudes." "What's multitudes?" "It means," Maren said, "that your father is showing off a word he learned, and we should let him have this, because he doesn't get out much." Liv shrieked with laughter, and Elvar pressed a hand to his chest like a man shot and said, "Wounded," in front of the produce, and Maren bought the rambutan out of spite and peeled it on the spot with her thumbnail. The rind splitting wet and bright, the inside pale and slick and sweet, and had to admit, grudgingly, in front of a delighted 6-year-old, that it was good, and that became the joke. The dumb, smart fruit. The thing she'd refused to trust and then loved. The way the midnight crate had been the first joke, the way these things accrete between people, until they've built a private language without noticing the bricks. They sat on a low wall in the shade with peaches, the stone warm through the seat of Maren's jeans, the juice running sticky over her knuckles. Liv ran ahead to watch a man twist balloon animals, well within sight, and for a moment it was just the 2 of them. "She has a thing in October," Elvar said. "A school thing, a science showcase. Parents are meant to help. I am not, historically, a parent who helps. I help with my checkbook." He turned a peach pit in his fingers, around and around, the same motion as the ring. I told her I'd help this year, and then I realized I have no idea how, and the person I thought of, he stopped, started again. The person I thought of was you, which is not in your contract. Which is, in fact, almost certainly a violation of several things Sigrun would list for me alphabetically. He didn't look at her, but Liv would like it, and I would like it. And I've spent a long time arranging my life, so I never have to want anything I might not get, and I find lately I'm out of practice at wanting things quietly. Now he looked at her. Will you help us build a baking soda volcano in October, Maren Holt? That's the entire question. It's a very small question. It was not a small question, and they both knew it. The sun came through the overpass in long, warm bars. Liv's laugh carried back to them, mixed with the guitar. A peach was the sweetest thing Maren had tasted in years. Okay, she said, but I'm doing the chemistry properly. No baking soda. We're going to make her the best volcano in the history of that school, and 3 teachers are going to be mildly frightened. That, Elvar said, is the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. And he said it lightly as a joke, the second joke, and they both heard the part underneath it that was not a joke at all. And neither of them touched it, and the moment held, perfect and gold and doomed, for exactly as long as it takes a child to come running back, with a balloon dog and the news that she has named it after the rambutan. That was the glimpse. Maren would take it out and look at it for a long time afterward, the peach and the bars of light, and will you help us build a volcano? And she would understand that it had been the top of the wheel, the highest point, the place from which the only direction was down. The fall came 11 days later, and it came, as these things do, dressed as a kindness. The Calder correction broke in the trade press on a Wednesday, exactly as Maren had designed it. Halden uncovers internal sabotage, clears engineer wrongly, blamed in decades' worst collapse, and for about 30 hours it was a triumph. Her phone, silent for 4 years, filled with the names of people who had not returned her calls in 2022. Theo sent a single text, told you. Get it in writing, now get it framed. Liv made her a card with a glitter volcano on it that shed a small permanent constellation across Maren's desk. And then, on Thursday afternoon, a financial blog with a large readership and a small conscience ran a different story, and the headline was, Billionaire's Convenient Heroine, How Halden's Maren Holt Engineered Her Own Redemption, and a seat at the top. It was Dorian's hand. Of course it was. From administrative leave, with nothing left to lose, and a lawyer telling him the board review would not go his way. He had done the only thing he had ever truly been good at, and he had managed what people were allowed to know. The story was a masterpiece of true things arranged into a lie. It noted that Maren had been at the restaurant where Sten dined the night of the crisis. Strange coincidence. It noted that she had named her own correction strategy in a board meeting. It noted, with photographs taken through a long lens, that she had been seen at a farmer's market holding the CEO's daughter's hand. It asked, in the tone of a concerned citizen, how much of the sabotage narrative could be trusted from a woman who had so clearly stage-managed her own rehabilitation and so thoroughly inserted herself into a wealthy single father's life. It used the word opportunist 4 times. It used the word governess once, which was worse. It was vile, and it was, in its arrangement of true facts, almost impossible to disprove because every single brick in it was real. Take care on the way down, he had said. The lobby floor gets slick when it rains. He had told her, and she had not been able to stop it after all. Maren read it twice in her office with the door shut, and the August sun pouring in, and the harbour sparkling obliviously below, and she felt the flood water come up, the old shame, you are the problem, and underneath it a newer and far worse fear, which was about a 6-year-old, and a man and a peach, and a thing she had let herself want quietly after promising She never would. Sigrun came to her office before Elvar did. That told Maren everything. "You've seen it," Sigrun said. She did not sit. She stood in the doorway in her summer linen, with her face composed into the customs officer blankness, and the only sign of what it was costing her was the way she held her own forearm with her other hand gripping it. A small private brace. The share price is down 4% and falling. The Meridian people have called twice, and there is a photograph of you holding my niece's hand on the internet under the word governess. Which means that child will eventually see it, because children always do. Her voice was very even. I told my brother this arrangement was irregular. I did not anticipate the precise shape of the irregularity. I anticipated only that there would be one. "It's a lie," Maren said. "Sigrun, you know it's a lie. You read the deployment logs. You know what Dorian did, at Calder and here. You know I didn't engineer. It does not matter what I know." Sigrun's voice cracked, just slightly, like ice over deep water. "That is what you keep failing to understand, Miss Holt. You and my brother both, you brilliant, naive people, who believe that truth is a thing you can deploy like a patch." She drew a breath and steadied it. "It does not matter what I know. It matters what 40,000 shareholders fear. It matters what that little girl will be asked on a playground. My brother has spent 2 years rebuilding from the inside out so that nothing could reach Liv and you. Through no malice, I'll grant you no malice, you have given the world a long lens and a tender photograph and a single ugly word." She paused. "I am not your enemy. I want you to hear that. But I am that child's aunt before I am anything else on this earth, and I am going to do what protects her, and what protects her is for you to be a consultant who was paid and thanked, and is now quietly gone." She turned to leave. At the door, she stopped. "He won't ask you to go," she said, without turning around. "That's the tragedy of it. He'd burn the company down first, and he'd do it gladly, and he'd call it principle. So someone who loves him has to be the one to make it cost less than everything." Her grip on her own arm tightened until the knuckles paled. "I'd hoped it wouldn't have to be me. I'd hoped you were what the headline said, so it would be easy. You weren't. It isn't." And she was gone, her heels precise and fading down the gold corridor. Maren sat in the sunlit office for a long time. The glitter from Liv's card caught the light on the desk. She thought about the milk crate and the cold store and Theo saying, "Get it in writing." And she thought, "You got it in writing, you idiot, and it doesn't matter. Because the things that actually break you were never the things in the contract." And then she thought the thought she had spent 11 gold days not thinking. And she let herself think it all the way to the bottom, because the bottom was where she lived, and she might as well be honest about the address. Maybe Sigrun is right. Maybe the kindest thing I have ever done for that man and that child is to leave before I cost them more than I'm worth. Maybe Elvar really did just need a fix and a story, and the rest, the dinners, the peach, will you help us build a volcano? Maybe that was a lonely man mistaking gratitude for the other thing, the way he said he and Liv's mother had mistaken compatibility. And maybe in a year he'll be relieved I had the decency to read the room. Maybe I am exactly what my father said, too much wanting in a life that had no room. She did not rage, she did not demand an explanation. Rage would have been hope, and she was fresh out. She opened a blank document and she began, in her clean, even logic, to write a resignation and a transition plan. Because if she was going to ruin her own life again, she was at least going to leave the integrity layer, documented for whoever came next. Outside, for the first time in 3 weeks, summer clouds came up over the harbor, and the light in the office went flat and grey. The grey of a lake under cloud, and the air conditioning hummed on indifferent in the empty quiet. The first fat drops hit the glass and ran. When Elvar came to find her at 6, her office was clean and her badge was on the desk, and the resignation was in his inbox, and she was standing at the window with her bag on her shoulder, watching the rain come in over the water. "I'm not accepting it," he said. He had the document open on his phone. His voice was wrong, too controlled, the control of a man holding something heavy. "Whatever that blog said, whatever Sigrun said to you, the answer is that I'm not accepting it. We fight it, we sue. I'll put my name on every correction. That's exactly why I have to go," Maren said. She didn't turn from the window. The rain ran down the glass in long, warm tracks, and the city smeared and ran with it. "Listen to yourself. We sue. You'll burn it all down and call it principle, and every battle you fight to keep me makes the story truer. Billionaire defends his governess, and the only person who pays the full price that is 6 years old and isn't in this room." She made herself turn around. "I read your sister exactly right the day I met her. She loves Liv more than she loves the company. And she loves the company like a child. And she came to me today, not to threaten me, but to do the brave, ugly thing you can't do, because someone has to." She's right, Elva. That's the unbearable part. She's right. She's protecting an asset. She's protecting your daughter. Maren's voice did not rise, and so am I. That's the one thing I can still give either of you that doesn't make the headline truer. She picked up her bag. The strap bit into her shoulder. It was a good story while it lasted. The fix, the volcano. I'll send Liv the chemistry properly, the real reaction, so she can frighten her teachers without me. Her throat closed, and she pushed through it. "Don't make this harder by being decent about it. I've had a lot of practice leaving rooms. I'm good at it. Let me be good at it, Maren," but she was already past him, close enough to smell the cedar and paper of him one last time, and she did not let herself look at the drawing on the window. 3 figures, one small, and she walked down the gold corridor in the grey, rainy light and got into the elevator she now had a badge for and rode it 41, floors down through the heart of the company she had saved. The doors opened on the lobby, and she walked out across the marble, slick, just as he'd promised, and out into the warm summer rain, and that was the lowest point, and there was no comfort in it anywhere, and the rain did not feel like grief or absolution or anything at all. It just felt like rain, running cold inside her collar, soaking her to the skin within a block. She went back to the restaurant. There was nowhere else that was hers. Theo found her at the bar at 11 that night, in the dark after close, sitting where the customers sat, which she had never once done in 3 years of working there. He did not say, "I told you so." He poured 2 short glasses of the good cognac he kept for staff, funerals, and weddings, and slid one to her across the wood. The glass left a wet track on the polished bar. The cognac smelled of caramel and old oak. The room smelled of lemon oil and cold ash from the grill, and the rain coming in the propped-open door. And for a while, he just let the quiet be. "My second wife," Theo said finally, "left me a note on the espresso machine because she knew it was the one thing I'd look at first thing in the morning 40 years ago." He turned his glass. The amber caught the one light still on, and do you know, I have run this room for 26 years and made it the kind of place men spend $100 million in, and I still cannot froth milk without reading a note that isn't there anymore. He let that sit. "I'm not telling you it stops mattering. I'm telling you it's possible to build something beautiful on top of a thing that aches, and that the ache doesn't make the beautiful thing a lie." He looked at her, the old narrow shrewd eyes. "You didn't engineer your own redemption, girl. You're not nearly cynical enough. I've watched you tip out the bussers from your own share for 3 years. The blog got one thing right, and 1,000 things wrong, and the one thing it got right, that you fell into that family like a stone into a well, isn't a crime. It's just expensive." Maren wiped her face with the back of her hand and didn't bother to hide it. The cognac burned a clean line down her chest. I left, Theo. I did the right thing. Why does the right thing feel like this? Because you did the safe thing, Theo said, and dressed it as the right thing, and you're smart enough to half know the difference, which is the worst kind of smart to be. He pushed the cognac an inch closer. The glass scraped. You left so they couldn't make you leave. Same as Calder. You flagged it quiet and went small so that when it broke, nobody could say you'd made a fuss. You've spent 4 years perfecting the art of leaving the room before they can throw you out of it and calling it dignity. He shrugged, a small, terrible kindness in it. I'm only the man who pours the wine. But I've watched a lot of people decide what they deserve. And you decide it the way a customs officer decides a suitcase. Everything pings. It was, she would think later, the truest thing anyone had said to her all summer. And it had come, of course, from the man who poured the wine. She did not sleep that night. She sat in her small apartment with the rain finally stopping and the August dawn coming up clean and washed over the rooftops, the gutters still dripping, a single early bird trying out the quiet. She thought about going small and about a 6-year-old whose first theory was that it was her fault, and about a man straightening a drawing as though no one would ever see, and about the difference between protecting someone and disappearing on them, and calling it the same thing. And 40 floors up, across the waking city, 3 things were happening that she did not witness, and would only learn about later. And the rule of the close third person is that she could not see them, and so neither could the part of her that kept score, which was perhaps why what came next undid her so completely. Elvar Sten did not sue the blog. He did something far more expensive. Maren learned the shape of it on Saturday when Sigrun Sten came to the restaurant. It was mid-afternoon, the slack hour between lunch and dinner, and Maren was polishing glasses at the empty bar in a shaft of hot gold light, the cloth squeaking on the crystal, the room smelling of floor wax and the basil from the prep kitchen. The door opened and Sigrun walked in out of the summer glare, alone, in her summer linen, and stopped, and looked around the dim, beautiful room as though appraising it, and then walked to the bar and sat down on a customer's stool, with the straight spine of a woman who has decided to do a hard thing and would prefer to get it over with. Maren set down the glass and the cloth and waited. She had learned this much. With Sigrun, you let the door open onto the guillotine in its own time. I've spent 30 years, Sigrun said, being the one who does the necessary ugly thing so that my brother can keep his hands clean and his heart intact. It is a role. I chose it. Someone in a family has to be the customs officer, or the whole enterprise floods. She set her handbag on the bar with a soft, expensive thud. On Thursday I told you to leave, and I told myself it was for Liv, and it was for Liv, and it was also. She paused, and the pause cost her. It was also because it is simply easier for me to believe the worst of a stranger than to watch my brother risk his heart on someone the world has handed me a reason to distrust. I have protected him so long that I have started protecting him from the only things that might make him happy. I did not see that clearly until I watched him this week. She opened the handbag. She took out a single sheet of heavy paper, and she set it on the bar, and she turned it to face Maren, and she slid it across the polished wood with one finger. The same gesture. Maren thought wildly that Dorian had used to slide the tablet down the boardroom table, and how strange that the same motion could carry ruin 1 month and its opposite the next. My brother, Sigrun said, convened the board yesterday at 6 a.m, having not slept, and informed us that he intends to restructure the Integrity Division as an independent subsidiary, wholly spun out from Halden with its own governance, beyond the reach of our share price and our headlines, and, he was at pains to specify, beyond the reach of me. Her mouth did something that was almost, but not quite, a smile, and he intends to give controlling interest in it to its founding director. Outright. Not options, not a salary. Ownership. She tapped the paper once with one fingernail. He had the papers drawn before he slept. He has not signed them because, and I quote my brother, who is not a sentimental man and was, yesterday, entirely sentimental, "It isn't mine to give to her. It's hers. I'm only the one who gets to open the door." She slid it the last inch. "Read the second clause." Maren's hands were not steady. She picked up the sheet. It was heavy and cool, and the light fell through it, showing the watermark. She read the second clause, and then she read it again, because her eyes kept failing. It was a transfer of ownership. Real, irrevocable, structured so that no board and no blog and no future falling out could ever take it back. It made her, in plain language, the owner of the thing she had built. And the company name on the letterhead, the name Elvar had chosen for the new subsidiary at 6 in the morning on no sleep, was not Halden, and it was not Sten, and it was not anything corporate at all. It was Rambutan, the dumb smart fruit, the thing she'd refused to trust and then loved. "I don't understand why you're giving me this," Maren said. Her voice came out wrecked. "You came here to Sigrun. On Thursday you came to my office to make me leave, and you were right about the headline and the playground and all of it. Why are you the one bringing me this?" Sigrun Sten looked at her for a long moment, and the customs officer blankness was entirely gone, and underneath it was a 60-year-old woman who had spent her life loving people by guarding them, and had just understood the cost of it. "Because I read the Calder logs again last night," she said. "All of them. Including the 4 emails the architect of records sent, begging them not to use the override. I had read them as evidence before. Last night I read them as a person." She stood and gathered her handbag, and her composure, the way you gather a coat against weather. "You sent 4 warnings, and then you went quiet, and let them ruin you, because somewhere you had been taught that making a fuss was worse than being destroyed. I recognized it." She drew a breath. "My brother is downstairs in the car. He doesn't know I've come up first. He thinks he's going to have to convince you, and he's terrified, and it's good for him, so I'm not going to spoil it entirely." Now the almost smile arrived fully. "But I wanted to be the one to hand you the paper, because on Thursday I did the necessary ugly thing, and I was wrong. And a woman my age does not get many chances to walk into a room and undo the last ugly thing she did while she still can." She held out her hand. It was cool and dry and gripped Maren's hard. "I'm sorry, Maren, for Thursday, for the word governess living in my silence when I could have killed the story in an hour and chose to use it instead. It was beneath me, and I knew it, and I did it anyway, because I was afraid. That's the whole apology. I'm told the good ones don't have an excuse stapled to the end." "Thank you," Maren said. "Don't thank me. Sign the papers, and then make the subsidiary so profitable that the board I chair has to be polite to you, forever. That's a far better revenge than forgiveness, and you'll enjoy it more." Sigrun released her hand and walked to the door, and at the door she paused, framed in the hot gold light. "He named it after a fruit," she said, to the room in general, with the bafflement of a woman who has spent her life among serious men. $100 million enterprise. Named after a fruit. I despair of him. Go and put him out of his misery." And she went out into the summer, and a moment later, through the propped-open door, Maren heard the low murmur of the city, and footsteps, and then the door filled with a different shape. Elvar Sten stood in the doorway of the restaurant where he had thrown a glass against a wall, holding nothing, looking like a man who had walked a long way on no sleep, and the rain was long gone, and the late sun came in around him and lit the dust in the air to slow gold. "My sister got here first," he said. "It wasn't a question. She did. She's terrifying. I think I love her. Everyone does eventually. It takes about a decade and a near-death experience. He came in, slowly, the way a man crosses ice he's not sure of, his shoes loud on the bare floor, and stopped a careful distance from the bar and looked at the paper in her hand, and then at her face, and seemed to decide that the paper was easier. "You read it." "I read it." Maren set it down on the bar between them. Her hand was shaking too much to hold it. "Elva, you can't give me a company because a blog called me a name. This isn't. You don't fix a headline with $100 million. That's just the same instinct that threw a glass at a wall in the first place. The biggest possible gesture instead of the true small one." "You're right," he said. It stopped her. "You're right," he said again, "and that's not why I'm doing it. I want to tell you why I'm doing it, and I've never been any good at this, so I'm going to do it badly, and I'd be grateful if you didn't fix it for me, halfway through the way you fix everything. Because I need to get to the end of it myself." He put his hands flat on the bar. He turned the ring once, and then made himself stop, pressing both palms to the cool wood. "When you walked out on Thursday, I sat in that office for an hour, and I did the thing I always do, which is reach for the biggest lever I can pull, and I had the papers drawn. And then, at about 4 in the morning, I realized I was doing it wrong, that I was trying to buy back the thing I'd let walk out the door the way my whole life I've tried to make sure that nothing I need can ever be taken from me." His voice was very low, and then I understood that the papers weren't the gesture. The papers are just true. You built it. It's yours. I should have structured it that way in week 1, and I didn't. Because some part of me wanted you to need the job, so you couldn't leave. That part of me is the part that's alone in a glass house at the top of a tower. And I'm trying to evict him, and it's slow. The bar ticked in the heat. Somewhere, a tap dripped, slow and steady. The whole quiet, beautiful room held its breath. "The gesture isn't the company," Elva said. "The gesture is that I drove here to tell you that Liv asked me this morning where you were. And I didn't have a screen to hide behind, and I had to sit in the stillness with my daughter and tell her the truth, which is that I'd let someone leave, and that I was going to go and ask her to come back. Not as a director, not as a fix, not as anything with a contract." He looked at her, the grey eyes not flat now, not flat at all. "I'm not good at wanting things quietly. I told you that, with a peach in my hand, and you let me have it. So I'm going to want this one out loud, in an empty restaurant, with no leverage and nothing to offer that isn't already yours. Because the man at the top of the tower would never do this, and I am trying very hard not to be him anymore. A breath. Come home. Build the volcano, frighten the teachers, not for the company. He stopped, and almost reached for the bigger word and didn't, the way the rules of his own restraint demanded, for the rambutan, and there it was. One declaration's worth of everything, smuggled in inside the joke, the dumb, smart fruit carrying the weight that the bigger word would have crushed. Maren looked at him for a long moment. She thought about going small. She thought about the milk crate and the 4 emails and the customs officer who decides every suitcase pings. She thought about Theo saying, "You left so they couldn't make you leave," and called it dignity. She picked up the paper. She read the second clause out loud, all of it, in her clean, even voice, to the empty room, because some part of her needed to hear it land in the air, the ownership, the irrevocability, the proof that this time she had not gone quiet. And then she folded it once, precisely, and set it back down, and came around the end of the bar, out from behind the wood where she had stood for 3 years, being the kind of woman nobody remembers. Her shoes quiet on the worn floor, and she stopped in front of him in the hot gold light, close enough now to see the exhaustion and the hope warring in his face. "I'm going to sign it," she said. "Tomorrow. With a lawyer and Theo as a witness, because he's going to insist, and he's earned it. I'm going to own the thing I built. I've decided I'm allowed. Okay, Elvar said. The relief in it was a whole weather system. And then I'm going to come home and build a volcano with your daughter that violates several school safety guidelines. She took a breath, the hardest and easiest breath of her life. And I want to be very clear that I'm not coming back for the company. I'm coming back because a man drove to a restaurant with no leverage and wanted something out loud, and that's the bravest thing I've watched anyone do all summer. And I've watched myself save $100 million. Her voice caught. She let it. I spent 4 years making myself small so no one could throw me out of the room. I'm done leaving rooms, Elvar. Tell me to stay, out loud, with nothing to offer. Same as you did. Stay, Elvarsten said. And he didn't reach for a bigger word, and he didn't need to, and outside the propped door, the summer city went about its evening. The smell of someone's grill drifting in warm off the street, and the late sun came through the glass, where weeks ago he had thrown his voice like a glass against a wall, and neither of them moved for a moment, and then they both did, and it was not dramatic, and it was not for show. It was just two people in an empty restaurant deciding to stop leaving, and that was the whole of it, and it was enough. The volcano, in October, was a catastrophe of genius. Maren built it with Liv over 3 Saturdays at the long marble table in the penthouse which had acquired, over the autumn, an alarming number of soft things: cushions, a dog bed with no dog yet but ongoing negotiations, a throw blanket that someone actually used, a wall where Liv's drawings were no longer taped one at a time but framed in a long bright row, the orange 3-figure 1 in the center, level. The whole place had started to smell like a home, like toast in the mornings, like the clay and vinegar of the volcano experiments, like a child's wet swimsuit drying over a chair. They used a real reaction, an actual exothermic eruption that hissed and steamed and produced a small, distinguished gout of foam, and a science teacher did, in fact, take 1 step back, and Liv stood in front of the class and explained, with her tongue between her teeth and a pencil behind her ear, that she did not need but had decided was professional. Exactly why the thing erupted, because she actually looked, because most people don't. She won. Of course she won. She was the most too much person in the room, and she had been taught that this was the entire point. Maren stood at the back of the school gym in the autumn afternoon light, the place smelling of floor varnish and orange slices, and the particular dust of 100 children, with Elvar on one side and Sigrun on the other. Sigrun had appointed herself the child's official scientific patron, and now feuded gently and constantly with Maren over methodology, which both of them enjoyed enormously. Theo sat 3 rows up, having closed the restaurant for the afternoon, and told no one why, dabbing at his eyes and pretending it was the heat. Frankly, Sigrun murmured, watching her niece accept a ribbon, the foam was excessive. The foam was the whole point, Maren murmured back. That's what I'm telling you. It was excessive. It was perfect. I despair of all of you. And she squeezed Maren's hand, once hard, the customs officer who had decided at last to wave the suitcase through. That night, after the ribbon had been taped to the window beside the orange drawing, after Liv had explained the reaction to her bedroom ceiling, until she ran out of words and went under, Maren stood at the great glass wall at the top of the tower where a lonely man had once declined a call. The city lay below in autumn dark, a field of low warm stars, and the glass was cool under her palm, and the company she owned was somewhere down there with its lights on, running clean, counting every crate exactly once. Elvar came and stood beside her. He didn't put a screen between them. He'd gotten better at the stillness. It was slow, but it was happening. Theo asked me today, he said, whether I knew that the night I told you to fix it or stay furniture, you'd already been sitting on a milk crate for an hour deciding whether to walk away and let it all collapse. He turned to look at her. He said you almost did. He said you'd read the last chapter of that book before, and you knew how it ended. I had. I did. Maren leaned her shoulder against the cool glass. Down below, a ferry crossed the dark water, sounding its low, patient horn, and somewhere across the harbor another answered, the way they always did. I picked the pencil back up because of a drawing on a window. I didn't know whose it was yet. I just knew somebody in this glass box still taped up the things that mattered where they could see them, and I thought, anyone who does that is worth one more all-nighter. She looked at the framed row of drawings, the orange 3 figures level in the center. I didn't know the small one would hire me, in juice boxes. Elvar laughed. The croissant laugh, the open window laugh, the one she'd given him back. Fix this, he said quietly, and I'll hire you. God, the worst sentence I ever said, and the best thing I ever did, entirely by accident. Because you were too stubborn to let $100 million collapse, just to spite a man who deserved it. It wasn't an accident, Maren said. You leaned forward an inch. At the table, at midnight, when everyone else was laughing, you leaned forward an inch, like the only person in the room who'd actually heard me. I've thought about that inch a lot. She turned from the glass to face him. Everybody at that table mocked me. You're the one who said, finish it, quietly, just to me. That's not an accident, Elvar. That's the whole difference between a man who throws a glass at a wall and a man who's worth fixing the wall for. He didn't have a logistics answer for that. For once, he didn't reach for one. Outside, autumn had come at last to the city, the heat finally broken, the first cool, clean night of the season, carrying the smell of wood smoke and wet, leaves up even to the top of the tower, and the leaves on the brownstones 40 floors below had turned, and the ferries called to each other across the dark, and the lights of a small company called Rambutan burned steady and honest down in the grid, owned outright by a woman who had decided she was allowed. Come away from the window, Maren said. There's a 6-year-old who'll be up at 6, wanting to explain thermodynamics, and a dog we apparently agreed to, and your sister's coming for breakfast to relitigate the foam. Come sit down. Be still. You're getting good at it. And Elvar Sten, who had built an empire so that nothing he needed could ever be taken from him, and had learned at last that the only things worth keeping were the ones you couldn't hold that way, came away from the glass and crossed the soft, bright room, and sat down where the lamplight was warm and the blanket was real and was still. Down the long wall of framed drawings, the orange one hung level in the center, 3 figures, the small one holding on, and no one had to straighten it, because for the first time in a long time, nothing in that